Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I am Paul Morrow here on the Ops Desk, and today I'm very excited. We have with us John DePietro, radio host and the host of Road Patrol Live. You can catch him on social media and on the radio. Nobody I know knows the Karen Read case better, and that case is upcoming, and we wanted to get a conversation with him. We're very lucky to have him. So, John, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's an honor.
So listen, man, I got to ask you, there's been a lot of developments. So this is one of these cases that every time you think, okay, it's kind of stabilized and now they're going to get to it, something else happens, whether it's a witness intimidation issue or something relative to the evidence. And we've had a few things lately. So can you catch us up?
Yeah, the latest, Paul, and I'm going to come back to it, but the biggest difference is getting ready for this big retrial is that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts brought in Hank Brennan, very seasoned, had been a prosecutor, but then very successful as a criminal defense attorney. Hank Brennan has really changed the dynamic of the case and just even in the motions and the success he's had in the courtroom. Now, this case, the retrial, was supposed to start April 1st. Now, the defense has been reeling, and Hank Brennan has been digging into maybe the arrangement they had, that they were less than forthcoming with some pretty potent witnesses, that this group from a company called ARCA. And they were successful with that. The judge agreed with the prosecution that the way the defense presented them as independent was not exactly the way it had worked. And he had uncovered that. That changed the tone from the judge. It changed the tone.
Let me interrupt you. Brennan uncovered that?
Hank Brennan uncovered that. This is something that's really big, is the switch of a new U.S. attorney in Massachusetts. Because of President Trump coming in, there is a new U.S. attorney in Mass. As a result of that, you don't have the old U.S. attorney that went with this federal investigation on how the police were handling it. But Brennan wanted all documents, and what he found was the defense was less than forthcoming. They had communicated with these two, quote, independent experts. That came to light. That had them scrambling. That also has really changed, Paul, the way Judge Cannoni has dealt with the defense. Alan Jackson, again, very talented defense attorney out of Los Angeles. He was in the New England area because he handled Kevin Spacey on a case in Nantucket. He's also represented Harvey Weinstein. Jackson had worked in Los Angeles, even ran for attorney general. He's a very skilled attorney. He owned the courtroom. He owned the courtroom inside. He owned the courtroom outside with these outside press conferences. Yeah. He is rattled. You now have a judge, the same judge as the first trial, Judge Cannoni, where she's now weighing everything he says and stops, and whether or not they're trying to, work something in or really pinpoint them literally on every word. And Paul, Brennan doesn't give an inch. Hank Brennan could play line for the New England Patriots. They probably could use him. Yeah. He does not give an inch on anything. He challenges every motion. He's been successful. He has totally flipped things with these witnesses. But the latest with the Karen Read trial now is we're going to wait to see if the judge is, in fact, going to push this back to April 25th, or it was supposed to start jury selection on April 1st. That's a huge development. And I want to just quickly mention the Commonwealth, Paul, they were overwhelmed in the first trial. Right. The person that did it, Adam Lally, he had never encountered someone like an Alan Jackson. I haven't seen a skilled attorney like an Alan Jackson since I one time covered a case where Johnny Cochran was in the courtroom. Just total command of the courtroom, really commands the attention of everyone. But that is out the window now. The judge now, and she warned them, that they have been less than forthcoming with these witnesses. She put them on notice. There was speculation, Paul, that maybe she was going to bounce them. Because keep in mind, Jackson is not from Massachusetts. He's there,
He's waived in. He's called. It's called pro hoc vice. In other words,
exactly.
While he's not admitted in that jurisdiction. And just to clarify, it's a state level case. It's a Massachusetts case. It's a homicide. It's a murder, manslaughter, leaving the scene case. Those are the three charges. Yes. But there are federal implications because there was a simultaneous or roughly contemporaneous federal investigation, and some of the evidence from the federal investigation ends up sort of coming into the state case, but they don't like the way it came in. There's this question of
Yep.
whether or not the company that reconstructed the crash that supposedly occurred when her car ostensibly, allegedly hit O'Keefe, that is the victim, whether
Yep.
that can come in as an independent expert or somebody who's working for the defense. That's where the squishy stuff is here. And it sounds like it's starting to really cut against Team Reed. And that is a very, very new thing because, as you said, first time around, Jackson just came in and he just used the he's a big city lawyer. It's L.A. He's got a very
Oh yeah.
cinematic style. He looks the part. He's used to being in front of the camera, and you did get this sense that he sort of star powered the room a little bit. Am I wrong?
100%, Paul. You're right on the money. And not only that, but the word that there was a federal investigation that kind of hung over the whole trial. It gave the defense, they were certainly pretty arrogant about it. All the Karen Reed supporters outside,
Yeah.
there were rumors, Paul, that at any day the feds were going to come around. They were going to start indicting the witnesses.
Right.
That is all out the window. What we have learned is the federal investigation is complete and there were no arrests and there were no indictments. They were investigating how the police were,
Right.
Massachusetts State Police, the Canton Police, how they were investigating the Karen Reed case. They found there was no police misconduct, that there was no conspiracy. So the fact that the federal investigation is over and that they didn't find anything out of the ordinary, that's been big for the Commonwealth.
And that's big because if you think about it in these, to use the legal term contrapositive, if you think about it, had the Fed said, what, we've looked at this thing, there is indicia of a conspiracy. Now, the defense's alternative theory about what happened to O'Keefe starts to look reasonable because, well, look, a federal investigation comes
Yeah,
around to the same thing that we've been claiming if you're the defense. Now you have the reverse. Now, as a result of the investigation going nowhere on the federal side, the prosecution is in a position, if it does come in, they can say, yep, all of this was investigated and there is no indicia of a cover up. Not that the Commonwealth police officers here, let's be frank, covered themselves in glory because it wasn't a wonderfully conducted investigation, despite the
true.
fact that many of them were experienced. And I'm not saying that any substantive aspect of the investigation was blown, but I'm sure they would all like to have a lot of what happened back. So let's start to do that. Let's look a little bit more at some of the minutiae of the case, because as I said, nobody knows it better than you do. Here she is. They're out drinking. It is January of 2022.
Yep.
It's that fateful night, 29 January. Now, I got to ask you, in the macro sense, what happens is they're out there bar hopping. They're highly intox. They go to the house of a friend of his that he doesn't really know that well, apparently, that she doesn't know at all. And
Right.
then that's where the stories diverge. She says he goes into the house. The prosecution says no. She hits him with the car. She leaves him in the snow and she goes home. And then we get all of the disputes. Let me start with one thing right now because I've seen some squishy reporting on this. How many drinks did she have?
She had 9 drinks, Paul.
Nine.
She had 9 drinks, and that was from the prosecutors presented that from there were cameras inside both the McCarthy's and also the waterfall, and also they had the receipts, excuse me. So she had 9 drinks that night.
So she's a relatively small person. I mean, you can
Yes,
tell just from seeing in video her in comparison to others. Her health isn't great. Great. My
no,
understanding she has MS, I believe, correct?
she does, and
All
she's
right.
had some other health problems. She was actually even doing doubles, which she would order a vodka tonic and then even have a sidecar on it. So she'd make it into a double for herself, but she's not. She's actually very thin and frail.
Wow. So she's got at least nine drinks in her. Some of them are doubles. It's a relatively short period of time. And yes, she drives. She's the one
Yes.
who's driving the car when they go to the house.
Yes.
All
And
right. So,
he's drinking Bud Lights, and he is relatively new in town. John O'Keefe, Boston police officer. And tragically, his sister passed away and his brother-in-law passed away. So he stepped up. He had been living in Dorchester and said, "You know what? I'm going to move into the house where they had been living, so then his niece and nephew they could stay there." So he was still kind of new in town. Irish bachelor, never been married before, and suddenly now he's taking care of his niece and nephew. So he's still kind of getting into the groove of being, taking them to soccer games and various activities like that. And he's still meeting people in the town. They end up at the same place. He meets some people. He was with some people he did know, the McCabe's, Matt and Jen McCabe.
Right.
But it was the first time really he was interacting with Brian Albert. And Paul, what's important
And Brian
to know,
Albert's, it's Brian Albert's house that they go to.
it
So,
is.
right.
And he's a
Okay.
Boston police officer. I mean,
Right.
I covered him on the Craigslist Killer. I mean, he's pretty well known, respected. He did Gang Task Force. I mean, Brian Albert was a really well known
And he's
Boston.
a sergeant, right? Isn't he a sergeant rank?
Yes, he
Right.
is.
Okay.
And so the thing about this is they all kind of respected that Officer O'Keefe stepped up.
Right.
His sister passed away. He's like, I'm going to jump in and do, live there and the best for those children.
Yeah.
So they all kind of, hey, this guy's okay. He's really doing something
Quality guy's
admirable.
doing the right thing. Right.
Yes.
So they're willing to accept him, but he doesn't know everybody that well, but he kind of
No.
does know, he knows the McCabe's.
He does.
And that's the connective tissue here.
That's exactly right. And Jen and Matt McCabe, so their daughter is very, very friendly with John O'Keefe's niece. And Jen McCabe, fifth grade teacher, 4 daughters, both her and her husband, Matt, both really involved in the communities, the community of Canton. They coach basketball, they coach soccer. They got to know John, and they were like, he's a good guy. He's doing the right thing. Jen McCabe had been friendly with his sister, but they thought the world of him. His niece, and this is important, his niece spent so much time over at the McCabe's. I mean, she lost her mother, then she lost her father. Jen McCabe so many times would make sure that the niece got to school on time and picked up from soccer practice and so forth. And so, they see this guy and he's likable and everyone seemed to like him. So they say, come on over. It's a blizzard tomorrow. We're all going to hang out. And she's on the phone with John O'Keefe, giving him directions how to get to her brother-in-law, Brian Albert. Jen McCabe's sister, Nicole, is married to Brian Albert. So she's giving him directions of how to get to their house.
So they're all sort of semi-familiar with each other, but not really, really tight.
Right.
But everybody likes what they see. Quality people. Everybody stepping up where needed.
Yeah.
Come by the house. It's a snowy night. He heads over there, and as we said, their stories diverge. So I have a question for you relative to the first thing that jumped out at me when I started looking at the evidence, and that's the following. Yeah. When they ultimately do the investigation later and they dump his phone, and this is obviously after whatever happened, whether or not he certainly gets out of the car, whether he went in a house or whether he's dying in the snow, there is a point there, subsequent to him leaving the car quite clearly, where Karen Reed calls his phone. And in fact, she calls it numerous times.
Yes.
But there's a point there where it's not long after he got out of the car, and she's cursing him up and down. She calls him a pervert. She calls him an F in this and F in that. Okay. Now, I've heard that audio, and she pretty clearly is not acting. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I know you know the case. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I know nobody knows, but this is the thing. She's not acting.
No.
She's screaming at him.
Yes.
That
Rage.
indicates to me rage. That indicates to me 2 things. Number one, the relationship is somewhat frayed, which is come to light now that it was. There was some tension there. She was flirting with another guy by text who was at the bar. Okay, got all of that. But in my mind, she very clearly knows, or at least believes, I should say, that he's alive. Because she's leaving him messages for what she believes is a live person. Where I'm going with that is the following. She thinks he's alive. If you even accept the idea that she hit him with the car, they're still charging intentional murder. And yet, because they kept that charge in the first case, you had murder too. The jury hangs, as we all know. Now we're going into the second trial. I expected when Brennan came in, he was going to say, well, we blew it last time, or where the Commonwealth blew it last time. I know he wasn't involved. Is they overcharged her. Let's knock it down to the manslaughter charge. Say it was an unintentional killing because it was an attempt. It was an assault, and then he goes DOA. But they kept the murder 2 charge, which I find interesting. Any theories on that?
Well, here's the thing, Paul. So even though someone is, we'll say someone's intoxicated, which she certainly seemed to be, or one would be if they had 9 drinks.
Absolutely.
Even if you then gun your car backwards, which is what they allege, and her Lexus apparently shows data that she gunned it backwards, and even got it
Right.
up to 24 miles an hour. As much as you may be angry and intoxicated, you're still maneuvering your car to strike someone. The way that I view this is they feel that she had an opportunity to call 911. She could have called and said, I think I clipped my boyfriend and it was an accident. She never called 911. She never rendered aid.
Mm.
And then even the next morning, when she apparently went by and realized he was right where she had left him,
Right.
she still never called 911. I believe the grand jury came to the murder too because she knew that she had hit him, or she had even said, I think I may have clipped him, but
Right.
I don't think I hit him that hard. But instead, according to the Commonwealth, he went flying backwards and fractured his skull on the ground that was rock solid because it was in the single digit temperatures. I
Right.
think where that came from was because she didn't render aid. She didn't call 911. She didn't do anything. And then she tried to dismiss it that, not to get too much in the weeds, but initially she told Jen McCabe, I didn't see him after we left the waterfall. And then Jen
Mm.
McCabe said, well, Karen, I saw
The
your
waterfall
vehicle in
being the bar.
the bar
Right.
that they were at.
Right.
And then she had to backtrack and backfill because Jen McCabe was looking out the window and said, well, Karen, I saw your SUV out in front of the house. So
Right.
then she realized she had been seen. When she initially called Kerry Roberts at
Yeah.
5 o'clock, she said, John's dead. I think a snowplow hit him. So I think how they reached that was almost on instinct. She started to backfill and tried to come up with an alternative as to what to happen to him. When I first encountered this, I thought, okay, it was an accident. But that's what I think it comes down to, Paul, is even if someone's intoxicated, if you knowingly back up your vehicle and strike someone and it's freezing out and the guy freezes to death because he's knocked unconscious, um, I think that's how they came up with murder too.
So she gets home. As you said, the first call she makes, she has one story. Then the story seems to morph when she realizes, ooh, they saw the SUV.
Right.
Because her story is going to be first, I never saw him, and then her second story is, oh, the last I saw him, he was on the steps and he was waiting to go into the house.
Exactly.
Here's the thing, and you know the area. I'm sure you've, between Road Patrol Live and everything else. I'm sure you've been around the house. You've probably seen the site of the death. I assume, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, in light of that and the fact that it is a very, very snowy overnight, including at the 5 a.m. point when she's in the car with these other women ostensibly looking for him,
Exactly.
they drive by the house. Is it accurate that neither one of the other people in the car sees him, but yet she
Correct.
mysteriously does and leaps out of the car?
And runs right to him. And just so Paul, people understand, the street is everybody's got about 1 acre to 2 acres of property.
Hmm.
So you're not exactly, it's not like inner city. It's not like you're next to somebody in Queens or something like that. It's a pretty good amount of property. It's snowing like crazy. And where his body was found was kind of off in the farthest point from the driveway. I also want to point out, Paul, and this is really important, that she sees a house of activity. She sees people going in and out because people were arriving there. Some people were just popping in and going out. I believe Karen Read, she thought that someone saw her. And when she's back at his home that night, I think either A, she's waiting for someone that was inside the house to call her and say, hey, what happened? Or maybe even for the police to come and get her. And she calls her parents and she's just kind of sitting there all night. She may have been drinking. But that morning, and it is a full fledged blizzard at this point, and no one's out on the road except they are. They pull up and the wind is howling. You can hear it in the police body cams. And amongst all the snow, she runs right to him and then gets on top of him and is trying to give CPR. But obviously, at that point, they believe his body temperature had dropped to 82 degrees and his heart stopped pumping. He was literally buried in the snow from a little after 12:30 till then when they finally got there at about 6 o'clock in the morning.
And ultimately, the cause of death is ruled to be blunt force trauma, but
Right.
also hypothermia because
Exactly.
it's
And that
so
part
it's so cold.
is really important because the ARCA experts, Karen Read was saying, the experts determined that there's no way that my car caused the death, but you would know with your years as a police officer. And unfortunately, this happens all the time everywhere. There's a fight outside somewhere. Someone punches someone else. They fall backwards. They hit their head on the curb.
And that's it. Very, very common.
And did the punch kill? Well, the punch to the face didn't kill him, but projecting him backwards.
Sure.
When she, boom, backed up and hit him and sent him flying, he landed on his back, banged his head. So it was kind of like the way she would phrase it, that they determined there's no way her car hit his head. Well, I'm not saying that her car hit his head. What killed him was he fractured his skull when it hit the ground. That's why he had the perfect raccoon eyes. And then also, I mean, it was single digit temperatures in a blizzard. He was then covered in snow, and then the poor guy froze to death.
Yeah. I mean, that does sound like it is the most likely scenario, but you raised
Yes.
something else that's new to this trial, the upcoming trial from the last one, and that is phone calls to her parents.
Yes.
So that was not brought up last time, but there is apparently some issue related to getting phone records from her parents, and to try to determine what went on that night as she's waiting at home, theoretically asleep, according to her, asleep on the couch, and then all of a sudden wakes up, oh my God, where's John? Where's John?
That's right.
Now, is her father going to be called to testify at the trial?
He's on the witness list.
Right.
He did an interview shortly after this happened. He did an interview with the local Boston TV station, William Reed, and he said, well, she was talking to me, and she said, Dad, I hit something, but I don't know what I hit. He was at the hospital. He was immediately by her side after this happened. The prosecutor, Hank Brennan, said, hey, listen, her parents can sit with her in court, but the Commonwealth reserves the right to call the father. It'd be very interesting to call Bill Reed, if anything, to clarify some of the statements that he claimed that he had with his daughter. Very, very active and involved with the case. But he seemingly was the figure that stood out the most. And also, Paul, and this is big, that morning they immediately noticed that Karen Reed had a cracked taillight. So in defense of the Canton police, who, and by the way, they don't handle a lot of murders. I know a lot of people watch TV and they think all police departments, you would know, the state police handle that. In Canton last year, there were no murders. The year before that, there were no murders. They don't handle a lot of homicides. Compared to some other police departments. So you have a situation where you have a cracked taillight. You have someone who was then found on the lawn. She was the last person that saw him alive. She's acting very odd at the hospital. She's even threatening to take her life at the hospital. She immediately packs up and leaves and goes to the parents' house. I don't think it's a stretch to say that it would seem you have a pretty good indication that she was, in fact, it's exactly how it seemed. And also, when she showed up, Paul, at the scene with Kerry Roberts and Jen McCabe, she doesn't say, oh my God, what happened? She doesn't say, what happened inside that house? When I saw him, he was fine. Right. Karen Reed doesn't say anything like that. I think you would say, what happened here? Instead, what was she saying? Did I hit him? I think I hit him. I hit him.
Right. And those are the things. That testimony actually comes from the teacher that you alluded to earlier,
Jen
McCabe. Who's from all appearances, a perfectly upstanding, stand-up person who has no iron in the fire here to lie about what she heard.
No.
There is a corroboration from the dash cam video, one of the dash cam videos, where you can kind of hear Karen Reed saying what appears to be that. Jackson skews it a little bit in defense and says, no, she's asking it as a question, and so it became a little fuzzy, and that's where Jackson's star power, I think, was, persuasive to the jury. But you raise another point that I think is so interesting because it's subtle. She not only does not say, what happened inside the house? I leave him to go in. I had to go to the bathroom. That's her claim, so I left. I leave him in the house for a party, and next thing I know, he's dead. Not only is she not asking about that, but think about it from her perspective as sort of another piece to that exact examination. If what she claims is the truth here were the truth, why does she wake up a couple of hours after she leaves him at a house party with a bunch of friendlies? Why is she waking up at about 4 a.m.? It's only about 3 hours later, according to the timeline, convinced that something is so wrong.
Right.
Why
point.
would she not be thinking, I left them, geez, they're still drinking at the house. Now, they're not living together, correct? That is Karen Read and he
No,
are not
she
living
would
together?
stay there quite a bit. But
Right.
and even if you thought maybe he hooked up because there was a woman that lived in the neighborhood that he had dated at one time, you're not. She's 42 years old. He's 42 years old. You're not calling your parents at
Right.
1 o'clock in the morning because you think your boyfriend's cheating on you. You're calling your parents if you think that you're in serious trouble.
She seems to absolutely have assumed the worst. 3 hours later, when she is theoretically sleeping on the couch, according to her, she wakes up, I knew something was wrong. Why would you think something is wrong? You left them at a house party with a bunch of other cops. They're hanging out
Right.
there drinking on a snowy night.
Yes.
I mean, does it happen all the time? No, it doesn't. I mean, it's a long night, let's face it. But that said, there's no reason that you would assume the absolute worst at
No.
4 hours later at about 5 a.m. and start calling around and saying, my God. Join us next time for part 2 of our interview with John DePietro on the upcoming Karen Read murder trial.